You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Welcome to One Bite is Everything, the podcast that connects every bite you take to the bigger world. I am your host, Dana DiPrima, and today I am thrilled to celebrate our new partnership with Heritage Radio Network with someone whose voice and vision have helped shape the way we think and feel about food. Dana Cowin is the former editor-in-chief of Food and Wine magazine, host of the Progressive Hedonist podcast, and a longtime champion of chefs, stories, and systems that nourish us, body and soul. We talk about the arc of food culture, from white tablecloths to food banks, from kale trends to compost joy, and from Lucky Charms to land stewardship. This episode is about food in all its forms. It's about how even the fanciest meals are connected to the farmers who grow the ingredients, and how supporting food equity and farming resiliency can be acts of joy, not just sacrifice. Whether you're sipping a single origin espresso or pouring cereal from a box, this conversation reminds us that all food matters, and the way we show up to food at our tables, at farmers markets, at food banks, and in policy shapes the world we live in.
I got to Food and Wine in 1995, so long time ago, but it was also the beginning of the conversation in America in certain ways around food as something really exciting, as food as entertainment, right? Before that, you'd had housewives making food. And when I got to Food and Wine, I was like, oh my gosh, there is so much more to food than just let's put it on the dinner table and, meat in three.
Food's transformation from a basic necessity to a form of entertainment in the U.S. began in the mid-20th century with the rise of television and cultural shifts. In the 1950s and 60s, cooking shows like The French Chef with Julia Child introduced Americans to the art and creativity of cooking, sparking an interest in international flavors and gourmet dining. As society moved toward more leisure time and the increasing availability of processed foods, cooking at home became less of a chore and more of an enjoyable exploration. By the 1980s and 1990s, food had fully evolved into a cultural and entertainment phenomenon, with celebrity chefs, food networks, and reality TV shows bringing it into mainstream consciousness. Cooking was no longer just about feeding the family. It became a social experience, an expression of identity, and a form of entertainment for millions.
So it was a phenomenal time of change because there were these chefs in America who were experimenting, and they were trying to find ways to be creative and expand our palate, expand our understanding of what was possible. And they were often digging into their own culture and background, but they were moving beyond the European model. Because up until that point, in the States generally, really good food was considered French. And if you're going to eat out, it was going to be fine dining with white tablecloths. And really in 95, 96, that's when we saw the beginning of change. That was the same year that the Food Network launched. So the beginning of the Star Chef era. And so from that point, 1995, to when I left in 2016, we really saw how food became the center of so much activity in many people's lives in America. And it was a very, very thrilling ride, because every single day, every week, every month, there would be a new chef who was doing something that was delighting the palate, their customers, and change, just constant change. And tracking that change as a magazine editor was so much fun.
And tell me one of the stories that really sort of defines your tenure there, like something that was just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. This is so exciting.
As the editor of Food and Wine, you get to have so many extraordinary experiences. I would travel. Now I think of it in the air miles and carbon. It makes me sort of sick to my stomach. But, I would travel for one meal. So Rene Redzepi had opened Noma in Copenhagen, and there was such a buzz about it. And I was like, I must get there. I must get a reservation.
For listeners who don't know about Noma, it is a world-renowned restaurant located in Copenhagen, Denmark, that has redefined fine dining with its innovative approach to Nordic cuisine. Founded by chef Rene Redzepi in 2003, Noma is celebrated for its use of locally sourced seasonal ingredients and its emphasis on foraging and reimagining traditional Scandinavian flavors. The restaurant has earned multiple Michelin stars and consistently ranks among the best in the world due to its creativity, artistic presentation, and commitment to sustainability. Noma's menu often shifts with the seasons, offering a unique and ever-evolving dining experience that challenges conventional ideas of what fine dining can be.
So 4 of us went. We flew to Copenhagen for one meal, and then of course stayed a few days and ate all around Copenhagen, which was delightful. It was the middle of winter, so that had its downsides. But eating at Noma completely changed my understanding of food, because I think up until that point, I'd thought whatever was on the plate and what's in the supermarket, like that's the food that we have. I went to Noma and Renee was cooking with all kinds of things I'd never heard of. I'd never considered a food before, like a spruce bush or, a local fish. Like his hyper local, hyper seasonal approach was so beyond what we in the States would call farm to table. That door never, on my mind, never closed. Just thinking how limited we are in what we consider edible and how much more there is to discover and how exciting it is to open our minds and bring more into our kitchens and onto the table. So it was really fun to apply for the meal, but it also had this incredible payoff in that it opened my mind forever.
Was there anything that happened sort of, in the big picture of food and dining that was disturbing during those times? Like that you look back on and go like, oh, that was a turning point?
Well, being at Food and Wine, I was very cognizant from day one that we have enormous privilege, right? All we're doing is writing about food that's delicious, travel, design, big kitchens. And the day that I started at Food and Wine, I also joined the board of City Harvest, which is a hunger relief organization. Something that was interesting with the chefs are always tapped to make food donations or to cook for charities. And what was interesting and maybe disturbing in a good way, though, is that what I noticed was that chefs were beginning to take on their own causes instead of making themselves universally available. And so at Food and Wine, we created something called Chefs Make Change. And I had this idea. I'm like, well, we have more than 1 million readers. If I could get $1 from every reader, I could fund 10 chef charities. And this would be so amazing. It is the greatest failure of a good idea that I have ever had. I mean, my mother gave some money. Someone in Texas gave some money to Jose Andres. But the turning point there was seeing how, with the food industry, we needed to be leaders because there was so much that needed to change. There was so much that needed to be addressed in terms of food insecurity and immigration and access to water, farmers needing to pay for equipment.
It's easy to think of food as a luxury, but Dana's story here highlights a hard truth. Even in a culture obsessed with eating, the people growing, cooking, and providing that food, especially in marginalized communities, are often on the brink. The good news? Our attention, our dollars, and even our dinner parties can help shift that.
Rick Bayless, I think, was part of that cohort. And Rick had a small fund where he gave microgrants to local farmers. And recognizing the responsibility as well as the joy was a turning point the fact that the chefs had such a voice and could influence so many people, and recognizing how great the need was.
Rick Bayless is an American chef, restaurateur, author, and television personality known for his expertise in traditional Mexican cuisine. Rick has played a significant role in supporting food-related charities and causes, particularly those aimed at addressing hunger and promoting sustainable food systems. He has been involved with organizations like World Central Kitchen, which provides meals in disaster-stricken areas, and the Frontera Farmer Foundation, a nonprofit established by Bayless to support small family farms in the Midwest by providing grants to help them grow and thrive. Bayless is also known for his commitment to local sourcing and sustainability, using his influence to promote ethical practices in the food industry. I think we should have him on the show, don't you?
Give me a sense for what you've been seeing in terms of trends and what's going on in the space of food.
So at Food and Wine, my focus was on trends. And trends were broadly identified as what we saw restaurant chefs experimenting with. That could be ingredients or cuisines or formats for restaurants. Were they doing pop-ups? Which is a big thing that happened sort of in the middle of my time there. Were they traveling? Where were they getting their inspiration from? Which is all in a way quite micro, right? Because they bring it back to their kitchens. What I've seen since I left Food and Wine, and this might be my personal bent rather than what's truly happening in the food world, I began to feel that those micro trends, like was it Brussels sprouts or was it kale, it's really not very interesting to me. And I'm sure that there are more of those moments. Like I remember I was so happy when I recognized almost before anyone else that shiso was going to be the big herb. I'm like, I knew that. I'm not interested particularly in that, although I go out enough to notice that there's like a lot of, Cavolo Nero on the menu. That's fine. But what I've seen as a bigger trend is focusing on foods and people and cultures that have been ignored or marginalized, and the highlighting of those voices and broadening our exposure to food, Nigeria, Ghana, these cuisines that are not well known in America, and through people who are great cooks and great recipe writers and great communicators and great cookbook writers, we now are beginning to see and understand these cultures better.
This is what local food really means. Not just reducing miles, but rebuilding meaning, whether it's a pepper that tastes like home or a fish that reminds someone of a shoreline thousands of miles away. These moments make the universal deeply, deeply personal.
And I find that incredibly exciting and compelling because, as I had said, we had been so Eurocentric, and then we were very American-centric, which was multiple cultures layered one on top of the other. And I would say more recently, we've had, yes, of course, you're never going to unlayer a layered culture. There's so many third culture kids. But just with the emphasis on understanding more profoundly cultures that we just hadn't spent as much time looking at or learning about. So that's one thing. And I think one of the great motivators for me in leaving Food and Wine was to pursue that path that started with Chefs Make Change, which is what is it in the food world that we can do to have a greater impact, and understanding all of these interrelated systems in the world of food. And so trend, I don't know, but focusing on what it is that is of value and what it is that we're losing, because we're losing so much in terms of farms and soil and land. And I'm interested in how people care so much more about that now than they did. Compost wasn't really a conversation like 9 years ago when I left, and now compost is an exciting conversation, at least at dinner parties where I am. Everybody's very excited about what's happening with our compost, or learning more about ingredients that are good for the land and good for people. So the view of wellness, which had been really a look at balance, right? If you eat and live in a balanced way, that will lead to wellness. But there's been so much dialing in on personal wellness and so much dialing in on what can we do to increase our nutrition and what are the ingredients that do that. That's also been interesting to see.
When you're talking about highlighting that chefs are highlighting their cultures and bringing them to the table and talking about them and writing about them, I find that to be super exciting because when I'm talking to farmers who are at farmers markets all across the country, particularly in urban areas where there are a lot of immigrants from other countries, those immigrants are looking for connection to home and they're looking for a particular kind of potato, or do you grow this kind of pepper? Or often the interchange is like, I've never heard of that kind of pepper before. Let me go and research it. If you could grow that pepper for me, I would be forever grateful. And there really is this incredible relationship that is built over the opportunity to taste your home when you no longer live there, and then to share that with your friends and neighbors who have always lived here or are part of that culture as well and miss it from their grandmother's cooking or what have you. So I think that's
I think it also depends on what part of the country you're in, but there's also farmers at those markets who are growing things from their culture that are not as well known to, whoever the people are in the state, like in Minneapolis, the Hmong farmers.
A side note here. After fleeing Southeast Asia as refugees in the 1970s and 1980s, many Hmong families settled in Minnesota, where they continued their farming practices, growing a variety of crops that reflect their cultural heritage. These include vegetables, herbs, and fruits that are integral to Hmong cuisine, such as Thai basil, lemongrass, bitter melon, and various types of Asian greens like Chinese broccoli and water spinach. Over the years, Hmong farmers have faced challenges related to land access, resources, and the integration of their farming techniques into the broader agricultural landscape. However, they have found ways to thrive, often selling their produce at farmers markets and directly to consumers in the Minneapolis area. The Hmong community's farming practices are highly valued for their emphasis on sustainability, diversity, and tradition, and they have contributed significantly to the region's local food culture.
And I love being in Los Angeles, and there's so many farmers from different cultures who've been there forever. I mean, it's not like it's a new trendy thing. They've been growing and bringing things to market for a long while.
I'm interested to hear what you think about the trends that I've seen in the last maybe 10 years, all kinds of nut milks that we've never had before, or people have become quasi anti-dairy and gluten-free, even if you're not celiac, or lab-grown meat, or even the rise of veganism. Like those kind of micro groups are sometimes informed, sometimes misinformed. Just curious in terms of that.
I think they often start with the idea of an allergen, right? Like a gluten allergy or intolerance. And then people are like, I feel better if I don't eat gluten. I don't feel that way. I actually eat as much gluten as I possibly can. And it's the same with dairy. I love dairy. So I don't know what that means about me or my ancestors, but there are people who eat dairy and drink dairy. It doesn't make them feel good. So they do the alt milk. So I think that sometimes it's driven by flavor, right? People who actually don't like the taste of dairy. And the vegans obviously come at it from many, many different points of view. Some about their own health, but also about planetary health. So you can have a philosophical vegan and an ethical vegan, or you can have a health vegan. So I think that those choices, none of them are monolithic. Don't think that they are all really about wellness. And I think that when it does become part of a wellness, like mission or tribe, it can get somewhat convoluted. Some people are against dairy for a complex set of reasons. If we get into cows are enormous methane emitters, on the one side, and that is terrible. And we really should be eating less meat worldwide. But simultaneously, on the other side, silvoforestry, which is the integration of animals into a healthy landscape, is actually a really good thing. So I think that none of these are black and white. And as soon as we make them black and white, we lose something.
So, since leaving Food and Wine, I'm interested to hear a little bit of what you're up to and what kind of direction you're in. I know that you've got a podcast, the Progressive Hedonist, but it's a lot more than a podcast. And I'd love to start by diving into the name, which I would love for you to explain. And then let's dive into the what.
So I've been noodling on an idea of how to put food, climate, and joy all together to make change and to inspire resilience, community, and really make an impact going forward. And Progressive Hedonist is the name that I arrived at because I was thinking, well, if I'm going to change my behavior, I am not giving up joy. Like I am a joy-seeking human, but I also want to have joy far into the future. And the thing about hedonism, the definition of the word, is that it's putting pleasure above all else, like your own pleasure. So it's actually a very selfish word. You can take hedonism with a selfish perspective and realize that if you don't look ahead and you don't take care of the planet and you don't take care of your neighbors and you don't take care of your community, then you will have no pleasure in the future. So the idea of progressive hedonist was that we should embrace the joy, but we should recognize that we need to do more to take care of the land and the people around us and bring people together in order to create this resilience for the future. So that's why I got the name. I was like, well, it has to be hedonist with a big asterisk. And the name was honestly a struggle because all the other names were super earnest, like sustainability for tomorrow, like terrible, terrible names. And I had a lot of pushback from people who were like, it sounds like all you want to do is throw parties. And they didn't like hedonism really for someone who's an activist is pretty offensive, right? Because it is so self-centered. And the idea is we want to benefit the greater good. But I got over that and I'm like, well, some people are going to hate me and some people will not. Some people are really excited about it. And I'm going to live with that. And so Progressive Hedonist, for the last year and a half or so, I've been co-hosting events with star chefs all around the country. And they've been potlucks. I mean, having potluck with a chef is a really great thing because they can cook and their friends can cook. And then you always are learning something from one another. And that's the goal. So we get together and then we share actions that exist in that community that today that are a solution for right now and for the future. And so, for example, I was in Portland, Maine, and as you can imagine, Portland, Maine, they're really focused on the water. And at the event, I learned about a couple of things that I didn't know about that I was so excited about. And the people who were gathered were like, oh, this is so interesting. One was about green crabs, which is an invasive species, that if we could make invasive species desirable, then we'd hunt them, sell them, and that would be fantastic. So I learned about a person who catches, I guess you catch crabs and then sells the green crabs. And another was Luke's Lobster, which has a really great lobster roll. But they also have a phenomenal training program for minorities at the waterfronts. Because to have a working waterfront is essential to continue having boats on the water, food from the water, that's local in America rather than brought in from China. So that's just two tiny examples of being at this one event. And we shared that and people were like, oh my gosh, it's like so good to hear about this. Another woman was harvesting salt, which was interesting. And another woman had a popular restaurant, but they were about to cross over and do food for healthcare facilities. I'm like, this is fascinating. So let's just give you like a little snapshot of what can happen when you get people from the local community who you'd think would know each other, but maybe do, maybe don't, to share these positive possibilities for now and for the times ahead. So that's what Progressive Hedonist is doing now. And I have events at my own apartment, hosting and gathering people also to share solutions. I'm very focused on mushrooms and mycelia and the metaphors therein, and connecting people and destroying toxicity and, making reciprocal relationships for the future. So I'm all in on mushrooms right now. I could obviously go on because it is the center of what I'm doing. I want everybody to be a progressive hedonist. I want everybody to galvanize their neighbors, recognize the potential of what exists and the importance of the interpersonal relationships for anything we're going through, whether it's local, political, or personal.
I really appreciate the joy, the hedonist part of what you're doing, especially because when you are asking anybody to make a change in their life, or they're deciding to make a change, they want to lose weight, you want to do something for the community, it's always about giving something up. The motivation is, oh, the community's doing it, there's peer pressure, there's shame, there are all of these negative components about how to do better. How to do better is usually not doing something that you used to do.
Yeah.
And the idea that you could enact change by getting people to be more joyful seems a lot more motivating.
Yeah, no shame. And that's the other key point, which is I feel that even just getting together and having the exchange of an evening and your time is good. And if it means you're still throwing out paper cups after you hear how bad that is, it's okay. There's only so much we as humans can do. And there's so many pressures. So I think that community, which is such an overused word, I'm sure there's a better one, but just getting together and that feeling, that emotion of we're in this together.
So you and I met because my podcast, One Bite is Everything, where we are right now, is joining the Heritage Radio Network, and Progressive Hedonist is there as well. And I thought it might be interesting just to get your take on the opportunity for new media like podcasts and, other alternatives where there are independent people talking about food, for example, and you're talking about food in a certain way, and I'm talking about food and how all that food on your plate is connected to all of these important things from, our relationship, our culture, the culture we've shared with our ancestors and our families, to the strength of our communities and our economy and our environment, our soil. For example, from my perspective, like the farmers, they're tending the land on a daily basis. The more I support them to do that well, the more power I have to make a difference. It's even better than recycling. But I'm interested to hear from you what you think about platforms like Heritage Radio Network and all of these kinds of podcasts in shaping the future of food and messaging and storytelling around it.
What I love about Heritage and other platforms that share individual voices is that you can find who you want in your head, whether it's a Substack or whether it's a podcast. I think that media is so fractured now. Yes, the traditional media still has an enormous amount of power, and I don't ignore that at all. But there is a parallel fractured set of media where passionate people meet passionate storytellers. And I think that there's such a beauty in that, of really developing a tribe or people just concerned and connected who want to know more and they want to go deeper. Because the thing about traditional media in general is that it is broader than it is deep. And the thing about podcasts and let's say Substacks is that you can go very deep. I remember the first year I was on HRN, which was probably 2017, so it's a super long time ago now. I was like, oh my gosh, there's no word count. This is amazing. Like, instead of saying, it's 2,000 words and you're done, I'm like, oh my God, I have 40 minutes of words. And so I could really have these conversations that went so much deeper than a traditional story would. And of course, online, anything can go deeper rather than print, right? But I love that you could just have this conversation and people just want to drop in. Like, they just want to be a part of it. It's like hearing is a participatory act, a little bit more than reading is. And so I love that about podcasts as a medium.
Let's time travel for just a minute. Going back to your childhood, what are the kinds of foods that were like, do you have like a childhood meal that someone prepared for you that was just like your go-to?
I loved fried chicken, apple pie, and egg creams.
Who's making those for you?
We had a housekeeper. My mother didn't cook. My father didn't cook. I come from an absolute non-cooking family. So like the first thing I ever made was doxy clams out of a can. And I made a really good grilled cheese where the cheese, it was white bread for sure. And then the cheese was processed. So it's separated in the broiler and you get a crispy top and a creamy bottom.
Do you ever go back to that? Do you ever make that just for fun?
No, but I love bad cheese on a burger. In any case, so I don't have any of the like, oh, my mom cooked and I hung out with her. She made black coffee. She ate those Danish cookies from a tin. That was breakfast. I don't think she ate lunch. And then my father was a very spare eater and a very clean eater. And my mother was the opposite. They were both very thin. So it wasn't like, Jack Sprat. But yeah, I just grew up in a very non-food household. Except my mother made a mean egg cream. It's great. And my father made crepes. Also great. But the food that I loved was this housekeeper who made apple pie the best. And at Food and Wine, actually, I had a recipe developer try to match my childhood apple pie. She couldn't do it. It was like 20 times. And eventually I just gave up. I'm like, you know what? Maybe it's me. It's obviously not you. Because we can't seem to get to my childhood apple pie. It had lard and it just had this really amazing goo at the bottom that was like caramelly and appley. Yeah, we couldn't get there. And then fried chicken. And I still love fried chicken. It's my favorite food.
So what about now? Is there some like highly processed, horrible, scary thing that you hide in your back of your cabinet that you love to eat?
I don't hide anything. I don't believe
you're a
that.
hedonist.
Exactly.
What brings you joy on the like super not farmy processed kind of side?
This is so crazy because maybe I just put these two things together, but I do like Trader Joe's Swiss singles. And I'm sure that there's no cheese in those things, but there's something about like the plastic texture of it. I don't really have a guilty pleasure because I don't find food that is truly guilt-inducing very delicious. Like maybe at some point I would say Swedish fish, but between the dye and the gums and, that would be as close as I would get. Like those sweet and sour thingies, but I'll have one and be like, yep, that was good. I'm done now. They've lost their charm for me.
Yeah.
Lucky Charms, speaking of charms, my favorite cereal of childhood. Again, go back. I'm like, it's kind of scary and gross.
You want to hear a little Lucky Charms story?
Yes.
So when I was a kid, I had a real health nut for mom, so I wasn't allowed to have any sugar cereals. Yet I lived in a community and all of my peers had fluffernutter sandwiches at lunch. They had all kinds of sugar cereal. So for my birthday, every year, they would buy me Lucky Charms.
Oh, that's so sweet. I love that.
You've been listening to One Bite is Everything. I hope that this conversation with Dana Cowin reminded you that food is never just food. It's memory, meaning, migration, movement, and yes, pleasure. It's how we connect to each other and to the future we want to build. I am your host, Dana DiPrima. If you loved this episode, please subscribe, share, and leave a review. And don't forget to check out Dana's show, Progressive Hedonist, also on Heritage Radio Network. I'll be back next week with more stories from the front lines of farming, flavor, and everything in between. Until then, take one bite and think big.